All right, so I want to make a video updating everyone as usual. Getting right into it, Alberta had 64 new cases over the last 2 days, I believe. The active cases went up a little bit, I think by about 15 or so. The numbers in Edmonton are actually the place that's actually going up. I think Calgary is actually pretty stagnant. But the point being is that a lot of people are saying, oh, this is because of the protests and all that kind of stuff. I don't really think that's the case because the protests, what were they? Weren't they on Thursday or Friday? So that doesn't make a lot of sense. It makes a little bit, but I mean the incubation period's up to 2 weeks. So I think the increase is mostly due to the fact that the government last week said, yeah, anybody who wants to get a test can get a test. And given the fact that the case numbers are so low, people are going be like, hey, we don't really got much to lose. Might as well go get tested. Because before, well, you go to one of these places to get tested, well, chances are a lot of the people there have it. Now it's less likely. Um, there's other stuff going on here because the protests in Canada started later than they did in the States. And I haven't seen any reported upticks in the States. So there's something else going on that probably has a little bit to do with it. The problem is that the people going to these protests are overwhelmingly young people. They're people in like their teens, 20s, 30s, maybe 40s, but no one in their, I mean, hardly anyone in their 60s, 70s, and 80s are going to this kind of thing. And those are the people that are actually at risk. So I don't think this has much to do with the protest because if it did, then why haven't we seen the uptick in the States? It doesn't make any sense that that's the reason. I have a lot of people I see on social media completely hyperventilating, say, oh, well, it's just because of the protests, but I don't believe that. It is possible. It is definitely possible. It just doesn't make sense why Edmonton is the only place that is specifically that it would be happening. I haven't seen any major reported outbreaks in Montreal or Toronto. Both of those places have been having protests longer than Edmonton. I think Vancouver's been having it longer as well. So it doesn't make sense that Edmonton is the only place, at least from what I've heard. Um, the other point being, the government has given literally no updates whatsoever on reopening. They continue to beat around the bush. It just seems like they're going to wait until as long as they possibly can at this point. Who cares about anything? We don't care how much evidence mounts up against our what we've been doing. We're just going to run with it anyway for some stupid reason. So, and the point I wanted to get to is actually this: in that CNBC reported virus patients without symptoms aren't driving the spread of the virus, the WHO says. And they are quoted saying asymptomatic spread of the virus is very rare, and that's according to the WHO. So again, this is another thing that I point out that you always want to be skeptical of your beliefs, and the way that you can tell whether or not you're generally making good observations and good um, recommendations, whatever you want to call it, is okay, what would need to happen looking back for my beliefs to have been wrong? Like, you know, and for someone like me who's been on the we should be open train, well, guess what? The stuff like this, the opposite should be coming out. It should be asymptomatic spread is driving pretty much all of it. It should be the overwhelming majority of people who are getting it are not social distancing, without which isn't true. We should be the places that have been reopened for the longest should have another outbreak, which isn't true. So all the stuff that points toward or hypothetically would point to someone like me being wrong have not happened, and at this point will not happen unless something radically changes, because there's been states that have been open for well over a month now. Some of them didn't fully close. We had some countries who didn't fully close. None of them have had any major issues. A lot of them less issues than average even. So again, all the evidence points towards the pro-lockdown crowd being wrong. And again, looking back on it, what would need to come out for them to be wrong? Well, what would need to come out? The virus death rate is much lower than we originally thought, which happened. The asymptomatic spread is much less than we originally thought, which happened. The people quarantining not having a significant effect on the spread, which happened. The state with one of the heaviest lockdowns was New York, and look how they turned out. I mean, you look at a state like Florida; they have quite a bit of not as much as New York, but they have some big cities, and have they had massive outbreaks? Well, no, they haven't. So again, the whole the New York has a lot because they're a city doesn't make that much sense. And like I say, other things like that. There's a handful of things that point towards the pro lockdown crowd being completely wrong. Um, so anyway, this is from Spencer Fernando. He says, politicians and experts have not yet comprehended the damage they did to their own credibility by shifting messaging on lockdowns based on politics. For many people, this is waking up to how truly dishonest and despicable the government has become. I don't know if I would say the last part. I think that there's a lot of people, actually, I wouldn't say a lot of people, but still a decent amount of people that just proved, I wouldn't say proved because I didn't believe it quite to this extent going into this, but it just shows that there's a very large percent of the population that will believe whatever the government tells them, no matter what. Like literally, no matter what. There is no evidence that the lockdowns have a significant effect, a lot of evidence that it has no effect on the spread, and yet you still have people who believe in it. You still have people that believe that it's a 3, 4, 5% death rate. You still have people that think that it sits on surfaces for 2 weeks. You still have people that think that, that they're hyperventilating and paranoid about sending their kids back to school, when all of those things are completely unfounded, and there's no reason whatsoever to do that kind of stuff. Like no reason whatsoever. So that's what I wanted to point out as far as that goes. This is from Tom Quiggin. He goes on to say, well, he actually links to a graph that shows household debt from 1999 to 2019, and it's pretty much consistently been going up. I mean, if we go onto it here, there was a big spike right when Trudeau got in. There's actually a big spike. It looks like Harper's first time around. Um, and yeah, that's the big problem, is that this is something that is going to kill Canada. That people can't just live based off debt. And eventually, someone's going to have to pay the bills, and when that comes through, that's going to be some bad times. And people have been warning about it for a long time. Me, pretty much as long as I've been making videos, which isn't that long, but at least I'm doing my part. But this is something we really have to figure out, that people point to, oh, the economy is not that bad. And this is something that's a bad thing in the States too. But I mean, their economy objectively was better than ours. It still is better than ours, at least depending in the more right-leaning states, especially. Um, but that's the thing we're going to have to deal with, and that people, we need to warn people, because this isn't something that's going to work out long term. You have all these people that are, oh, we're worried about climate change, and oh, we're not going to be able to maintain fossil fuels forever, but they're perfectly fine living based off massive amounts of debt, which objectively isn't going to last forever either. And anyone with half a brain knows that most people nowadays are not going to be affected by climate change, but you're going to be affected with all this debt. Like, you're going to have to pay it one way or the other. So that is something that we really should be worried about. But a lot of people just don't care, because we have the idea of infinite resources, which just isn't going to work out. This is a very important point as well. This is from Dan Bongino. He goes on to say, when cultural and educational elites spend a generation telling kids what a crap country this is, they shouldn't be surprised when those kids grow into adults eager to rip it to pieces. Now, none of this started last week or last year. The damage has been done over decades, and it's a very good point that we live in a, at least in Canada. I mean, they do it in the States as well. That what are we taught in school? We're taught flat out lies. A lot of the history we're taught is very selective. We're taught to hate white people. Oh, well, white people, they came and stole the land from the natives. Well, white people, the only race that had slaves. Like, again, the history we're taught about is either very selective, or I would say outright misleading, because what they don't tell you is, well, back in the day, the land was up for the taking. Like, if the natives routinely stole land from other natives, so it doesn't make it okay now by today's standards. But the problem is, you can't retroactively judge people. That's like retroactively judging a doctor 500 years ago because he didn't prescribe antibiotics. Well, they didn't exist back then. You can't judge him for that. So it's the same thing as judging, oh, they stole land. No, they really didn't. And the other thing to point out too is that the whites in South Africa were there before most of the blacks in South Africa, and the blacks are currently stealing their land, and none of these people seem to care. So again, the idea all comes back to, it's good when it benefits the left, it's bad when it doesn't benefit the left. So if history makes the left look good, we'll talk about it. If it makes it look bad, we're not going to talk about it. That's basically what we're taught about history. You have a lot of outright communist teachers and professors, especially, that are brainwashing kids. And again, the numbers clearly back that up. There's hardly any conservative or especially like libertarian teachers out there, like literally hardly any. And it's for the simple reason that if you're a teacher, you're probably working for the government. You probably loved your university and you're free this, you're free that. So of course you're going to be a big lefty. And that's the problem, is that they teach people nowadays to hate their own values, basically. And that's something that we really have to stop. And the last thing I wanted to talk about is from Paul Joseph Watson. He says, imagine if there was an open the pubs protest in London. Even if 100 people turned up, the media on the left would be outraged. Attendees would be publicly shamed. Thousands gather in London to protest something that happened in a different country. Media, that's fine. Now, again, it was actually tens of thousands, maybe even 100,000. I mean, they looked like there was a massive amount of people there, but yet nobody cares. And this is the problem: is that they're protesting something, that a problem that doesn't even exist. And even if it does exist, it happened in a different country. Like, why in the world does it matter that much? Like, is racism an issue? Yeah, but you're the kind of people that said, hey, if we go out and gather in large groups, we're all going to die. But all of a sudden, when your BS political agenda comes along, all of a sudden you're perfectly fine with it. So again, that's the big problem when it comes to this kind of stuff. I've been saying it over and over again, but still, I mean, I actually talked to quite a few people who are perfectly aware of this, who are people who aren't really super political, which I'm happy to see. But again, a lot of people still don't seem to really understand. They still think it's such a noble cause. I don't, regardless of if it's a noble cause or not. Uh, you're the kind of people that said, hey, if we go out and gather in large groups, we're all going to die. So again, which one is it? And this is the problem. Either one of two things is happening here. Either one, either the virus lockdowns were a complete and utter scam, and none of the people who supported the lockdown actually believe in them, or two, the virus is an issue and they do believe in them, and they want to get people killed. Which one is it? It's got to be one or the other. I mean, I think it's pretty clearly the virus is a scam, but they'll probably vehemently deny that, which means you got to resort to you're going to get people killed, because that's what they've been saying all along about the people who want to protest against the lockdown. So again, it's one or the other. So anyway, I didn't want to make the video super long today. I got some stuff to do, so I'm going to leave it there. If you'd like to, make sure to hit that like and subscribe. Check out my PayPal and email. Got linked in the description. Again, appreciate any donations, but at the very least, just hit that like and subscribe if you haven't already. And last couple things, as always, check me out on Twitter if you haven't already, and check me out on BitChute. All the links are in the description, so you can find them all there.